O Sangye Shuran Sokye Chognam La Jangcho Bardo Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chunyenge Pesonam Ki Rola Penchye Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Shuran Sokye Chognam La Jangcho Bardo Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chunyenge Pesonam Ki Rola Penchye Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Shuran Sokye Choknam La Jangcho Pardo Kyapsuchi Tage Chunyan Kipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchia Sangye Drupa Sho.
Okay, great. All right, so just to get over some of the things Rinpoche said yesterday and mainly to focus on the text. Well, a few things that weren't clear, maybe these three reasonings that Rinpoche presented. He actually presented all three, but I think it wasn't that obvious. Just to say a little bit about the context, and I won't say much before we go into the text, but Rinpoche just stressed again our self-grasping, that's the main problem. The self appears to us in a certain way, which is unrealistic. And so therefore, we're not aware that that appearance is wrong. And instead, we hold on to this self as truly existent. And then, well, from there, the other afflictions arise. So we should just stress that again. And then basically said that, well, of course, it becomes obvious. We have to understand how the self really exists. And there are different philosophical views with regard to what you need to understand to get rid of self-grasping. And then in that way, of course, get rid of the other afflictive emotions, karmic actions, contaminated karmic actions, and in that way, getting rid of suffering. Now, with regard to the self-grasping, well, there are these philosophical views, but also from a point of view of just experience. If you, and Rinpoche stressed this so much, so if you really followed or you follow what Rinpoche says, then hopefully you did spend the last 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks now, focusing more on the self. How does the self work and so forth? So how does it appear? How is it apprehended and so forth? And you may actually get to a point where you feel, oh, the self is not as solid. There is no such a solid self, etc. But it's usually explained that the first stage, you don't negate, you don't identify enough. You become aware of some sense of a solid I, but usually that is not enough. More needs to be negated in general. And some of the philosophical systems that are part of, well, Buddhist philosophy would also say that just a coarse sense of no self, that is sufficient to remove all the afflictive emotions. And that is something the highest philosophical school strongly denies, saying it's not enough. Don't stop working with the I. If you just remove this coarser self-grasping, that's not sufficient. Now, of course, it's important to learn more about it, what makes it coarse, what makes it subtle, but that's the point of this course, and of course of other courses, learning about it. But the point is here that that Chandakirti, not in his root text, but in his self-commentary, and also Lama Tsongkhapa commenting on it, talks about 3 absurdities. If you don't negate, when you realize selflessness, it's not enough to just negate a self-sufficient kind of substantial I, a permanent I, like an I that's the controller of mind and body. That is not enough. It seems to be explained that way, but it's more than that. So not just a permanent kind of I that controls everything. There's more to it. It's really understanding that the I only exists as an imputed basis with nothing there to be found. So this kind of deepest level is often missed. And like I said, from the point of view of our own practice, but also from the point of view of the other philosophical systems other than the highest, the Prasangika, there's often that misapprehension. And to overcome that, there are these three reasonings. The first reasoning is saying, well, the absurdity, if you say that an arhat, or someone who, well, a person who wants to overcome afflictive emotions or has overcome afflictive emotions, we're not talking about someone who's attained the state of a Buddha, but an arhat. If you're saying that person doesn't have to realize that subtlest type of emptiness with regard to the self, then there are three absurdities. And the first absurdity is that it would be in contradiction with what Chandrakirti says at the very beginning of his text. So at the beginning of his text, let me just look for it. At the beginning of the entry into the middle way, he says, wait, even when abiding on the first ground, no, that's not it. At this point, the first goes. No, that's also not it. Oh, yes. When had gone far, it's verse number 8 in the first chapter. It says, when had gone far, he will also surpass them by his intelligence. So that won't mean much to you, but if you studied the text, you understand that a bodhisattva, here it talks about the qualities of a bodhisattva. Chandrakirti points out the qualities of a bodhisattva and says, well, when you reach the seventh level, the seventh bhumi of a bodhisattva, then the wisdom of a bodhisattva will also outshine or surpass the wisdom of an arhat. Now, if an arhat didn't realize emptiness, selflessness on the deepest level, well, you wouldn't have to talk about the bodhisattva outpassing or surpassing an arhat, or even a practitioner, a Hinayana practitioner who's reached the path of seeing. Well, you wouldn't have to say that from the seventh ground onwards. It would be on the first ground. It would be from the moment a bodhisattva realized emptiness, he or she would surpass a Hinayana practitioner, because Hinayana practitioners, well, in order to attain liberation, they do not need to realize the subtlest selflessness. But why did Chandrakirti say so? Why did Chandrakirti talk about, or why, well, Chandrakirti, even if he talks about it himself as like, why did I say so? That it's from the seventh ground onwards. And of course, based on the sutras, I've said so. Well, because the wisdom is the same, except on a certain level, a bodhisattva is so advanced with regard to the understanding of emptiness that within a shortest moment that it takes a person to complete an action, in that moment, a bodhisattva can enter into a meditative absorption into emptiness and come out of it again. This ability, this mental flexibility, an arhat doesn't have. And that's why on the seventh ground, from the point of view of wisdom, here, a bodhisattva surpasses an arhat. That's what it meant. That's the first absurdity. So this would be incorrect to say that, because why would you talk about the seventh ground? If someone who aims for liberation doesn't need to realize selflessness or this emptiness, the deepest level of selflessness, that would be the first absurdity. The second absurdity would be that a bodhisattva or anyone aiming for liberation, anyone aiming for liberation, not a bodhisattva, but someone aiming for self-liberation, following the Hinayana teachings, that person doesn't eliminate afflictive emotions. They wouldn't eliminate afflictive emotions. They could temporarily eliminate them if they attain some of the samadhis, the different concentrations, which enable a person just temporarily to suppress these afflictive emotions so they temporarily don't arise. But they would never be able to get rid of the afflictive emotions for good, because the self-grasping, that deepest level of holding on to the self, that has not been removed because the opposite was not realized. So you haven't realized the lack of such a self. And then the third reasoning is, well, if that's not true, then you won't be able to get rid of the grasping at the aggregates, because really when you realize emptiness on the subtlest level, you realize it from the point of view of the self, and from the point of view of phenomena such as the aggregate mind and body, you realize the selflessness of all phenomena. So you have a complete understanding with regard to yourself. And as it says, therefore, if you don't, it's therefore, if you don't realize selflessness on the deepest level, you won't realize selflessness, and you won't realize the selflessness of phenomena other than the self. And as therefore, Nagarjuna says, as long as they're grasping onto the aggregates, there's grasping at the self. So in other words, if you believe you've realized selflessness, the subtlest selflessness, but you're still grasping at the inherent existence of your body and your mind, well, it shows you that you haven't realized the deepest level. So those are the three absurdities. First of all, there's no point in saying what Chandakirti said in the 8th verse. There is no point in, so that wouldn't make sense. Then secondly, it wouldn't be correct that an arhat gets rid of afflictive emotions. And thirdly, well, you wouldn't be able to get rid of grasping at the aggregates. And if you still hold on to the aggregates, well, you still hold on to a self. So this is what Rinpoche said, but in a really, he went through it really rapidly. So maybe some of you have missed it. Okay, anyway, that's one thing he stressed. And then another thing Rinpoche stressed was, again, the fact that it's self-grasping. It is self-grasping, is this holding on to inherent existence that gives rise to all our other issues. Now, in different ways, he talked about it as in saying, well, he gave this example like Asanga and Vasubandhu, who are philosophers of the lower philosophical systems. They say the root of our self-cherishing or self-grasping even is this mere mental darkness, just not knowing selflessness. That gives rise to everything. And Prasangika masters such as Chandakirti, he also mentioned Dharmakirti. He's not a follower of the Prasangika, but he still would disagree with what Asanga and Vasubandhu said there. But anyway, what Chandakirti in particular says, he says that's ludicrous. Just that mere mental darkness. No, we're dealing with something here that's like an aggressive grasper. It's a weird word, but a very determined mind that is not just confused about selflessness. Like it's like, oh, maybe there isn't, that kind of confusion. That does not give rise to self-centeredness. It's a mind that is determined. There's this I. It holds on to an I. It's not just a mere mental darkness. It's diametrically opposed to how the self really exists. And that then gives rise to this self-attachment. So we need to get rid of that. Rinpoche also spoke about this example. Well, the example of not believing in past and future lives, like being sure there are no past and future lives, versus just not knowing that there are past and future lives. There's a difference between them in strength of mind. Not understanding that there are past and future lives, but that's like a type of mind that lacks that energy of like giving rise to certain actions. So I think what Rinpoche really tried to say was like, it's not that mere mental darkness about selflessness, just not knowing selflessness, and that gives rise to all the trouble. No, it's more than that. It's a much more active kind of mind. It's this mind holding on to inherent existence. It's really an I. There's this I here. If I were to tear apart body and mind, I would find this I. That kind of sense. We're dealing with this, and that gives rise to self-centeredness. So let's not underestimate it. I think that's what Rinpoche tried to say. Anyway, that should be enough in terms of what Rinpoche spoke about regarding some of the issues, well, that I thought weren't clear yet. There's maybe one more thing towards the end, when someone asked about the self, how the self exists. I might as well just add that. When Rinpoche said something about the reasoning of mental darkness and, not mental darkness, of light and darkness. Let me just just formulate this one more time the way kind of Rinpoche put it. So the self, when we say I, for instance, it seems there's just I, that's just me, and there's nothing else. There's just me at the center of the universe, and that's the only I. But of course, I is only in relation to this mind. It's other in relation to this mind. Other living beings are other, but in relation to them, I'm other. So what makes me think there's this only I, really? So kind of taking it from there. There's so many different reasonings with regard to the self. So this is one approach. And then taking the example previously, Rinpoche had mentioned it, long and short. If they were inherently long, you couldn't have short. If there anything existed inherently, if the I existed inherently the way it appeared to us, well, they would be only others, and from others' perspective, there wouldn't be an I. Or long and short, or here and there. I mean, they don't exist inherently. They only exist in dependence on something other. So there's nothing within a pen that makes it long or short. There's nothing within me that makes me an I and someone else other. But that's how it seems. There's something within the object. It's self-contained. And I don't really need others. The I is always there. Likewise, with regard to the pen, long or short, there's a sense it's long or short. But if it were inherently that, well, either will have to be both or it would be neither. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. And they're actually contradictory, so long and short. Anyway, also with regard to this mountain and that mountain, what is this mountain? From this perspective, it's this. From another perspective, it's that. Over here, over there. And again, what is it? If there wasn't anything else, if it was just within itself, it were this mountain or over here and over there, well, that would be absurd. And this person also talked about the self and the mind seem to be the same thing. There seems to be no difference. So with regard to that, Rinpoche mentioned also this reasoning that was set forth by Nagarjuna about if the mind and the I are the same, then the mind would observe itself. It would perceive, it would apprehend itself. And if the mind apprehends itself, well, that would be like saying lightness illuminates itself. Light illuminates itself. And if light illuminates itself, so if the mind illuminates itself, in other words, if the mind apprehends itself, if the I is the mind, just to repeat it again, if the I is the mind, then saying I look at my own mind, I observe my own mind, the mind would itself perceive itself, because that's the I, and the I perceives itself, it perceives the mind, and there's no difference between them. So that would mean, just saying it again, so the light would illuminate itself. So light illuminates itself. But if light illuminates itself, so that's the function of light, to illuminate itself. If the mind has that function to perceive itself, then the light has the function of illuminating itself. And that would mean darkness also has the function of obscuring itself. And if darkness obscures itself, you couldn't see any darkness because it would obscure itself. That's the kind of reasoning Nagarjuna presents. It's maybe a little bit, seems a little far-fetched with like lightness and darkness and so forth, and drawing that, just, I mean, bringing up this reasoning. It's initially a little hard to understand, but just to repeat it. Anyway, but then let's look at the text itself, because Rinpoche went quite far. Now, just to summarize at the very beginning, we have first of all one verse. The verse, it's the introductory verse, paying homage to, well, the author pays homage to his teacher, and he promises to compose the text. Okay, that's just this introductory verse, which is customary for most texts, really, coming from Tibet or India as in like ancient Buddhist texts. And then next part is the text itself. So you had the introduction, and now the text itself, and there's a brief kind of indication, if you may want to call it that. So a brief kind of easing into the subject matter. It's a verse and a half. It's verse number 2. and then the first 2 lines of verse number 3. And the first, it's just saying, well, me, this lunatic child, the author himself, actually the mind, trying to understand how phenomena really exists, now realizes, or is about to realize spontaneously, like out of the blue, suddenly becomes aware of its own emptiness, or of emptiness in general, of the actual nature of phenomena. It becomes aware of that. So the author is saying, I'm like a lunatic child because I haven't understood this. And I've been with my old mother, I've been with emptiness all the time. Phenomena have never existed in this way. And suddenly I become aware of this. Okay. And how? How do I become aware of this? I mean, well, he says I'm about to become aware, but as Rinpoche explained earlier on, well, that means he's has probably already come aware of it. He has become aware of it, to be assumed. So anyway, so now he recognizes, wow, the mind never, my mind has never existed in and of itself. Phenomena have never existed inherently. I've found this mother who's long lost in the sense I've neglected her, basically. I've neglected the ultimate nature of all phenomena. And how did I do so? And that's described in verse 3, the first 2 lines. Well, having understood, whereas previously I thought it is all like this. It's inherently this, inherently that. And now I'll come to understand it's not inherently this. It's not inherently that. Why? Independence on my brother, dependent arising. Okay, brother, dependent arising. Why called brother? I mean, brother here in the sense that, brother in the sense that, well, also arisen from the mother, from emptiness. And as we later hear, everything arises, even dependent arising is only possible because it lacks inherent existence, because of its emptiness. And brother also in the sense that, like a brother would help in the case of Changkya Rölpai Dorjé. So if like has a brother assisting Changkya Rölpai Dorjé in order to understand the mother. So what's most important, if we want to get rid of self-grasping, we have to realize emptiness. But what helps us to understand emptiness? It's dependent arising. Dependent arising, not on its subtlest level, but on a certain level. When we understand that, we can infer based on that phenomena don't exist inherently. And that's what he did. Basically, on the understanding of dependent arising, through that reasoning, he came to understand emptiness. So that's just the introductory part. Then the text goes on, continues to the extensive explanation, so the commentary that Rinpoche uses by Geshema Wangmo, an Indian Tibetan master. So he composed this very precise kind of text. We still haven't gotten the permission. The letter was sent to Jeffrey Hopkins, but he hasn't given his permission yet. And I need to say this text needs to be worked through again. This translation is a very literal translation, and I don't think some of it is, I think some of it will be difficult to understand. To give you one example, Tibetans have a tendency when they write to stress that something is merely this is only this. They may use 2 words for only. So yang and zam, they use both. So they just stress it, they use both words. And that's what he also did. So he says, like, it's merely only imputed. So first I was like, merely only imputed? And I had to go back to the Tibetan to realize, oh, that's what he meant. So if you get this text, you may get a little bit confused about some of the vocabulary that he used. It's a little bit different to what the root text in English that I follow, which is by Thupten Jinpa. It's a little different to the vocabulary. Anyway, but yeah, if you get the permission, we get the permission to share the text, of course, you'll see this for yourself. But in the meantime, so this particular commentary, it talks now about the extensive explanation. And the extensive explanation, again, subdivided into certain sections. The first section is, let me just check whether I'm saying there, yes. The first section starts with recognizing, first of all, I mean, there's like it has different outlines, but I don't need to, or different headings. I don't need to go through all of them unless you've got it in front of you. It's just irritating. But it deals, first of all, with understanding, or the first heading is recognizing that all phenomena are manifestations of emptiness. So stressing this, that everything is a manifestation of emptiness, that is not easily understood. And to be honest, this text, of course, requires a certain understanding of emptiness already. Now, Rinpoche has already spoken about it quite a bit. We'll talk more about it, and hopefully it becomes a little clearer. The thing with emptiness, people are very interested to hear about emptiness. But oftentimes they find, oh, I've heard that before. I've heard that before. It doesn't help. I need to hear more. But actually, there's only that much you can say about it. It's a matter of really taking what you've heard and now applying it. And once you apply it, then you hear these words again and you can go deeper. So there's no kind of magical solution that you hear it over and over and someone explains it slightly differently. I mean, there's that much, it's only that much you can say about it. Of course, the words never convey the experience itself, but oftentimes people want to hear something totally new. But the problem with this is really, there is a limit to this totally new, and in the end you need to work on it. You need to go over it again and again, and then if you hear the same words that you heard last week, after you reflected on it, you hear something, you get a totally different understanding. So just want to stress that again. Anyway, what it says here, that, well, all phenomena lack that independent existence. They're merely labeled. They're empty of such solid existence, and therefore everything existing that way, everything is a manifestation of emptiness. So here it says this diverse subject-object world, this world of the objects that are apprehended, the things, the sense objects, and so forth, plus the mind, is my mother's gentle smile. So gentle smile, and as in like it's an expression of emptiness. It's the face of my mother. So sometimes you can look at it as like it's in the nature of emptiness. It's got that same nature, lacking inherent existence, or it's an expression of emptiness. And from this, the cycle of birth and death. So, well, this is my mother, sorry. So this diverse subject-object world is my mother's gentle smile. And everything that exists, our samsaric existence, is her deceptive words. It doesn't really mean she deceives us, the mother deceives us. It's just the poetic way of saying it. I'm being deceived. I'm being deceived. I don't recognize that everything is a manifestation of emptiness. Things appear without existing inherently. But to me, no, they have this intrinsic existence. They appear because they exist inherently. And from that ignorance, from that misapprehension, other afflictive emotions arise, etc. And so I'm in samsara. And I'm deceived by, I'm trapped in my own ignorance because I'm deceived by the actual nature, as in like, emptiness is right in front of me, but my mind doesn't perceive it. So I'm deceived. I'm letting myself be deceived. So my undeceiving mother, you've betrayed me. Again, it's not really saying you've really betrayed me, but I'm just not getting it. I'm not understanding this. So I'm trying to look for the commentary. What does the commentary say here? Well, all these objects, they're just appearances, and they appear to me in a way in which it doesn't exist. So I'm deceived in that way. Okay, let me just check what's really important here. So I'm deceived, and that's what also Jimmy Wangbo says. What he also says is, I'm deceived not only because I believe phenomena to exist inherently, but also, so I'm deceived in that way, but also I don't realize what is good for me and what's not. So I accumulate negative actions, believing this benefits me, but again, misapprehending the actual way in which phenomena exist. So I'm actually exposed to the fear of cyclic existence. So here, for instance, one quote here, for example, with regard to the self, if you apply this to another object, such as a vase, a pot or something, well, not being satisfied with the mere name, the mere terminology, the mere convention pot, when one analyzes, so searching for an object imputed, there's nothing besides an emptiness of inherent existence. So there's, if we start searching for something, for the way things appear to us in that mistaken manner, so not just being appearances, but it seems that on top of just being mere appearances, we believe them to exist inherently. And so if we look for it, we won't find anything. So this lack of finding anything, it dawns that it's merely a convention. So we come to understand that phenomena are merely conventions. And that's what we need to understand. So we're being deceived by this emptiness. We feel we've been deceived because we were led astray. We're led astray. We're betrayed by our mother, in the sense that we didn't realize all this, and we've been cycling in samsara since beginning this time. All right, so this should be enough for just expressing, or just talking, or just saying. So what are the verses recognizing all phenomena as manifestations of emptiness? What are the verses that describe that? Well, verse 3, lines 3 and 4, and then verse 4, the first 2 lines. So this is still a little bit confusing because it breaks up the verses a little bit. Later on, it doesn't happen that way. Anyway, so those words, what do they express? That everything is just a manifestation of emptiness. Okay. Then what is then expressed is that in order to overcome our problem, our limitations, the way Rinpoche explained them so beautifully, having this mind and this body, which are so limited, well, for that, we need to understand emptiness. There's no other way out. And that is indicated by verse 4, the last 2 lines, and then verse 5, the first 2 lines. It is ultimately in your kindness alone, O Mother, that my hopes for freedom lie. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. It's your kindness, is this emptiness, that this understanding that will take me out of samsara. And then in verse 5, it says, if the duality of subjects and object, as it seems to be, here's again duality of subject and object. We had this question yesterday. So duality in the sense that to any kind of mind, there's a sense the object is far away, it's over there. Secondly, there's the appearance of the object existing inherently, and the appearance of conventional phenomena. All right, so conventional phenomena, but appearing as inherently existent. So this duality, again, because of the sense that phenomena exist the way they appear to us, then if that really were as it seems to be, if phenomena existed the way they appear to us, then even the Buddhas couldn't help us. That would mean, in other words, that no change would be possible. If something exists self-contained as a vase, as an eye, or what have you, it would be independent of other phenomena. But as we all know, change can only take place in interaction with other phenomena. So unless there is a cause and a condition that gives rise to a seedling, for instance, if you take a seed that gives rise to a seedling or a sprout, you need other causes and conditions that enable that seed to transform in such a way that it becomes a sprout. So without these other causes and conditions, without depending on these other causes and conditions, it couldn't transform. So transformation, change wouldn't be possible, which means we would always be trapped in this existence we're in right now. So the author also says, if things were established from their own side, they would be established without relying upon anything. So there would be no removal of defects or no increase of good qualities. And so there would be no liberation and omniscience. Then he quotes Nagarjuna from his Fundamental Wisdom, very beautiful line, for whomever emptiness is possible, everything is possible. For whom For whomever emptiness is not possible, nothing is possible. So only if phenomena lack inherent existence, things work, anything is possible, but the other way around, it would be totally absurd, in other words. Okay. Now, why? If we've heard that in order to be released from the state we're in right now, we need emptiness, well, what is the reason for this? What is the reason for this? And the reason is expressed by, what is it, verse 5, the last two lines. The last two lines when it says, but this ever-shifting spectacle is in truth my changeless mother's expressions. Hence, there's indeed a way out. Which is saying, look around, these things around us, they are changing, they're impermanent. Our mind is changing, our body is changing, the things around us are changing. So what is this state of liberation? What is this state of enlightenment? And Rinpoche has also talked about it. It's all connected to the mind. It's all connected to the mind. Everything we're doing here relates to the mind, and the mind can change. It's part of this ever-shifting spectacle of all these things around us, including the mind. It's not permanent. The thing that is permanent is emptiness. That is changeless. Emptiness is the lack of a type of existence that we just wrongly perceive, this inherent existence, which has never existed. It's just the lack of that, and that is unchanging. But the things around us are changing because they lack inherent existence, because of this changeless nature of emptiness, because phenomena always lack inherent existence. That's why things can change. So this is expressed by the last two lines of verse 5. So really need to think about this. I mean, saying this, it sounds nice, maybe it doesn't make any sense. But for those of you to whom it makes sense, well, think about this. What does that mean? Everything else is changing around us because of this changeless nature of all phenomena. So that being the case, there's a reason for release. There's a reason for why we can get out of samsara. Okay, this is as much as Rinpoche did last time, I believe. This is where we got to. So now to explain in more detail the next section, which is verse 6 and 7. And here the outline is, or the heading for this section is recognizing all phenomena as manifestations of appearance and emptiness. So not just being in an expression of emptiness, but bringing in more dependent arising, being an expression of both. I mean, it'd be absurd to say it's only an expression of emptiness. No, all phenomena are an expression that is a manifestation of both, because they have both characteristics. Being an expression of is really just saying, they're only possible because they have these two characteristics. Phenomena can only exist, can only be there because they have these two characteristics. They lack inherent existence and they're dependently arisen, and they're not contradictory. As Rinpoche said yesterday, upon first hearing it, it's like they don't exist inherently. You just deny the existence of something. You even keep saying you don't affirm anything. It's just the negation of inherent existence. So it seems like there's no other option. But then you hear, yeah, but they exist in dependence. So it seems on hearing those words first as like a contradiction, but no, of course it's not contradictory as such, because they assist each other. They assist each other. So what does the author say here? This inexpressible mother of mind, not existing in any form, appears in all forms. And this mutual dependence of emptiness and form alone is an important lesson indeed. All right. Now, here with regard to what does this mean? So it does not exist. This mother itself does not exist inherently. So the mother itself, this inexpressible mother of mind, and we've heard why it's inexpressible. Of course, it can be explained, but only to a certain degree. Then we have to take over. So this is an important Buddhist concept. The scriptures are important. Yes, they are important. But the scriptures cannot prove anything. So don't rely only on the scriptures, because the scriptures can just present the reasoning, but the reasoning you have to go through it yourself to come to a first-hand understanding. So it's just saying inexpressible in that words do only that much. You can hear over and over and over again, but then you just get caught up in the words and you never understand it. So it needs to be applied. And therefore, the mother, the inexpressible mother, being inexpressible, so mother of mine, as in like anything that relates to me, has that quality of lacking inherent existence. Well, this lack of inherent existence also doesn't exist inherently, doesn't exist in any form inherently. All right. But appears nonetheless. It is out of this lack of inherent existence that anything is possible, as Nagarjuna says, and here as the author says, all forms appear. In this mutual dependence of emptiness and form alone is an important lesson. So understanding this interconnection between dependent arising and emptiness, so important. Now, how this is still part of this, recognizing all phenomena as manifestations of appearance and emptiness. And there's a further verse, and I'll go through this in a moment, verse 7. But just to go through verse 6, here the text talks about the dawning of emptiness as dependent arising and the dawning of dependent arising as emptiness. Now, this word dawning, dawn, like a sunrise, the dawn. It's an interesting Tibetan word. In English, it works actually kind of. In German, it doesn't work at all. You don't have a word like for dawning. If you use the word for dawning, it's like sunrise. What does that have to do with anything? But it's like in Tibetan, the word for east, where the sun shines, the eastern direction, for dawning, and the word for appearing are one word, can be used interchangeably. They have a different word for appearing, but actually in a certain context, to appear and to dawn have the same meaning. So just that you're aware of it. Now here, the word dawning is used a lot in this commentary, and Jeffrey Hopkins used this, the literal translation. So the dawning of emptiness and dependent arising. So the appearance of emptiness as dependent arising and the appearance of dependent arising as emptiness. All right, so this needs to be explained. What does that mean? The appearance of emptiness as dependent arising and the appearance of dependent arising as emptiness. Now, what it means is you need to realize those two in connection. You connected those two. So some of you may be students of a great teacher called Geshe Kelsang, who unfortunately right now these days is not teaching due to some physical conditions. But the point is that what he has stressed a lot is that we believe when we deal with emptiness, we oftentimes feel that, well, we look for the I and we don't find it. And this unfindability, well, with that, we realize emptiness. As it says, not seeing is the supreme seeing. Like seeing as in like not being able to find something. So this not finding something, not being able to find the self, well, that's emptiness. And in some texts, it's really saying that the non-seeing, the non-finding, that is emptiness. But it's not enough. That is not enough. Because what does that mean exactly? What we need to be able to do is how do we start our meditation? If we start to meditate on how the I really exists, where do you start? You don't start with trying to affirm. You don't start with, oh, the self exists like this or like that, because we already added too much to the way the self exists. In fact, with regard to everything that exists, we make things more solid, more concrete. We make things independent and solid, as if you can point at the object, the I. You could almost point your finger at it and then it would show you exactly this is the I, as if you could take apart mind and body and would find the I. This way in which we misperceive, in which we perceive an not existing I or inherent existence, that is a way in where you add too much to what is actually there. So adding too much to it, how should we start our meditation? By first getting rid of all the extra. Okay. How do we start a meditation on emptiness? Therefore, we start off with looking for that extreme appearance, trying to find it. And of course, we won't find it. We've added too much and we won't find it. It doesn't make sense. Logically, it doesn't hold up. So when we analyze, when we say we search for it, we're not searching for it like literally searching for it, but it's an analytical search. So where is that I? It appears so clearly to my mind. So is it here? Is it there? Is it one with the aggregates, separate from the aggregates? Where is it? And you end up with this non-findability. But that's not enough. That is not enough. So the moment you arise from that, so with this mind, of course, you just end up with this non-findability. But when you arise from that mind, without any other mind, you should be able to understand, but it exists in dependence. It's a dependently arisen phenomenon, dependent on causes and conditions, dependent on its parts, and most important, dependence on mind that labels it, being just labeled. That needs to be understood in that union. We're not saying with one mind, but the first mind not finding it. And the moment you stop that analysis, yeah, but it exists inherently. So denying the way in which it does not exist and positing the way in which it does exist, to have the middle way free from the extreme of nihilism and the extreme of adding too much of reification. So that's why the author says here, with regard to the arising of emptiness as dependent arising, similar. So then with regard to the appearance or the dawning of dependent arising as emptiness, where you focus on their dependence on other factors, and you come to understand that therefore, without needing another mind, that mind then leaves aside that understanding of their dependent arising and goes back into lack of inherent existence. So right away, those two are combined. It's not that you can't perceive them simultaneously. You can't perceive lack of inherent existence and dependent arising of all phenomena simultaneously, but alternately, thinking of this, thinking of that, and both make perfect sense. Because they lack inherent existence, they exist interdependently. Because they exist interdependently, they don't exist inherently. This bringing together of these two aspects, that's what this this verse is saying, verse 6, the last two lines. And that is, or is it verse? No, it's verse 6, the whole verse. It's not, it's actually only has 3 lines. It doesn't have 4 lines as the others do. And it's saying that here is this mutual dependence and how you realize this. So Rinpoche didn't go so much into it. It's also expressed by Lama Tsongkhapa in his principal aspects of the path, that without alternation and simultaneously, from only seeing dependent arising as non-deceptive, you're now able to bring the two together. Okay. Never mind this verse, it's translated slightly weirdly in this context. But if you look at the 3 principal aspects of the path, it says basically that you bring together together dependent arising and emptiness without seeing any contradiction here. Okay. And then Rinpoche gave this quote, the next quote by the scholar adept Norsang Gyatso. I mean, I had the text in front of me and all I could do was just read through it with the same speed that Rinpoche read through it. So that may have been a little bit confusing. But therefore I want to mention again. So when the analysis of the view, it says here, is thoroughly complete, This is a quote His Holiness often gives as well. When the analysis of the view is thoroughly complete through the mere dawning, the mere appearance of their objects, the mental consciousnesses and the sense consciousnesses induce definite knowledge, ascertaining their objects to be empty. So once you've understood this, once you understood this emptiness and dependent arising together, that because phenomena exist independence, they lack inherent existence, and because they lack inherent existence, they exist interdependently. Once that is complete here, then the mere arising, the mere appearance of different objects to the mental consciousness, the sense consciousness, induces definite knowledge, ascertaining their objects to be empty of inherent existence, without relying upon other reasonings or facts. And here he gives the example. So gives the example of the double moon, as you probably remember. If you look at two moons, you press your eyeball, or maybe you're drunk or whatever is the reason for you seeing two moons, but you know it's impossible. So there's just this appearance of two moons. It's just this appearance. The appearance is there. Okay, it's just as phenomena appear. The appearance is there. They appear and they appear. So when we say appearance, it has two aspects to it. They appear to our mind, but not just do they appear inherently. So this appearance of objects just appearing to our mind, they appear inherently. We don't realize that they appear to our mind because we label them, because we categorize this world around us, saying this is a table, this is a chair, and so forth. So based on that labeling, on these thoughts, we see the world in this way. So things appear to us in exactly that way. And we believe they are this. This is a table in and of itself. The thought I, right? It's just my mind labeling I, because the mind that is labeling, it's closest to its own self. I mean, it's the mind itself. So there's a sense, this mind here labeling that I, and anyone else manifesting well with the mind and a body is perceived as other. Okay, so to say it again, this mind that I have right now is connected to a certain body. There's an awareness. Okay, in other words, there's an awareness connected to a physical basis, and that awareness has that appearance of, well, a mind there and the appearance of a body. Different minds, of course, there's not just one mind. It seems like I'm talking about just one mind, but certain minds are aware of other minds and then aware of a body. And then the mind labels I on the basis of this mind and body, right? From the perspective of this mind, I. But then the mind wrongly believes that this I that's just labeled actually exists there. It's not just labeled, it's there. I'm labeling it because it's there. The sense that there's actually something intrinsic there. And that's why I have the thought I. No. There's nothing there. There's mind and body. And just based on that, I label I. And so this is merely labeled. And it's really the opposite way in which I just said. It's not there's something really there and therefore I label it or I call it I. No, it's just labeled on mind and body. And based on this mind and body, whatever the mind and the body does, I label I. My mind labels I. And because of that labeling, that I appears to my mind. But that mere appearance appears as if inherently existent. But once you understand that phenomena don't exist that way, then that appearance, of course exists. So that appearance, we understand it doesn't exist inherently. Similarly, with these two moons, the appearance of the two moons exists, but in actuality, there's only one moon. So when you're familiar with this, okay, there's this appearance. Okay, there's the appearance there. There's the actual appearance that exists, but the two moons, which also appear, that doesn't exist. You see what I mean? Like, so there's the appearance itself exists, just an appearance, but the two moons, which appear, they don't exist. So there's an appearance that exists and an appearance that doesn't exist. The fact that two moons appear, the second moon, that's not in accordance with reality, but just the appearance is there. So based on that, I come to understand, if I'm familiar with the fact this is just a mistaken appearance, I can know right away, oh, but there are no two moons, there's only one moon. So similarly, whatever appearances there are, there's the object itself, that's an appearance because we labeled it, but then mixed with that, a sense that it exists inherently. Once I understand that doesn't exist that way, although I still have that appearance, just as the two moons appear, I know this is impossible. So this is what Norsan Gyatso says. So just as, for example, through the force of previous knowledge that a double moon does not exist, just the appearance of a double moon to a being whose eye sense is faulty, well, whatever, maybe there's a fault in the eye or whatever, induces ascertainment of the non-existence of the double moon. So when ascertainment of emptiness is generated, then when one thinks on how the mode of existence of all conventional phenomena, such as actions and their effects and so forth, is, one posits these as imputedly existent, merely only nominal. Here we got the merely only nominal. So as only nominal. Okay. I hope this is a little bit clearer now with this these lines by Norsan Gyatso. So really just what he's saying is, once we understand, we still have these appearances. These appearances will remain with us until we become a Buddha. So there's the appearance, the existent appearance, the conventional object, but that is mixed with the appearance of that conventional object as if existing independently, as if existing in and of itself. And once you understand, the appearances will continue, but you don't need any further explanation. Once you understood that it doesn't exist that way, then despite the appearance, you know that that is impossible. You know that it can't exist that way. So just as with the double moon. I hope this made it a little bit clearer. Anyway, there's time for questions. How much time do I have left? Half an hour before questions. No, okay, I'm almost done. I'm actually done. I only have an hour and a half. All right. Let me just continue a little bit longer, a little bit further before I take questions. So this part I really wanted to stress because Rinpoche went into great detail on it. Then there's verse 7, briefly verse 7, not finding my father. Okay, now the father comes in. So Rinpoche at some point said, well, you can say father, you can say brother. Really, they're quite similar, but actually not exactly. Both refer to conventional truth. So the mother is the ultimate truth, emptiness. Father and brother refer to conventional truth. Brother, in the sense, the dependent arising, the reasoning of dependent arising that helps me to understand the mother, that helps me to understand emptiness. The father is the basis of emptiness. So the basis of emptiness, in the sense, like when I say the emptiness of the eye, what is the basis of the emptiness of the eye? The eye. So the basis of emptiness is very important. We don't just talk about emptiness floating in the sky. No, it can only be the emptiness of something, of course, the lack of inherent existence of a chair, the lack of inherent existence of a mountain, the lack of inherent existence of the eye. Okay, so you have the I that exists as a merely dependently arisen phenomenon, a conventional phenomenon, and that's the father. And based on that, you have the lack of inherent existence of that. Okay, it was never existed inherently. So it's the lack of inherent existence of that. That is the mother. So the dependently arisen conventional truth is the father, and the lack of inherent existence is the mother. So when you look for this father, okay, this I, for instance, this conventional I, and you look for something inherent there, really inherent there, the way it appears, what do you find? The mother. It's lack of inherent existence. So my mother is found, my father, the I, or any other conventional truth, is found in the mother's lap, in the sphere of emptiness, in the sphere of emptiness, as in like what you find is emptiness itself. That's how these kind parents save their child, I'm told. So I'm told, I guess it's like a sign of like being humble. I'm just told this. I don't really know myself. But the point is here that you find those two, emptiness and dependent arising. So you understand, therefore, that this is a conventional phenomenon, the I, the father. If you understand the father and you understand the mother, you understand the true truth, conventional and ultimate truth. And that's how you're saved. That's how you can overcome self-grasping. Okay. All right. So that was verse 7. And then what comes next is identifying the nature of emptiness. And that's what verse 8. So it says, evidently, my mother's face, the nature of my mother, the nature of emptiness. It's neither one nor different, one or multiple. It really means, what does that mean? That any phenomenon, when you look for the emptiness, you find the phenomenon is neither one with its part nor totally separate from its parts. You look for it, something inherently. When you look for it, so really what you find is the mother's nature, is emptiness, the nature of emptiness. That appears ungraspably. So without actually, it's not realistic to grasp it as inherent existent in my brother's mirror. So in other words, you find the emptiness through analysis. Does it exist inherently? Or if it exists, well, if it existed inherently the way it appears, so you find the mother by understanding it can't be found, not as one with its parts, not as separate from its parts. So the only way it does exist, not inherently, but as a mere conventionality, a dependently arisen phenomenon. So you find the brother's mirror. But yet a lunatic child like me had not the slightest clue. And it is therefore in verse 9, so now recognizing emptiness within our own continuum, recognizing ourselves to lack inherent existence. In that context, the author says, well, in verse 9, no, it's not that. The good news is, in other words, I don't have to set out and look for emptiness and come up with all these reasonings. No, it's all been presented to me on a plate. All I need to do is eat it. Or in other words, I don't have to go far to look for emptiness. No, Nagarjuna and Chantakirti, they set their legacy, they set their instructions upon the wind, kind of sending it towards me. And Manjushri Garba, that is Lama Tsongkhapa, he also sent it to us via bird. So in other words, it's all arrived here. I've got all these teachings right there, given by Nagarjuna, Chantakirti, and Lama Tsongkhapa. And in that way, well, I can actually relatively easily find my old mother, my ever-present old mother, without much hardship. But there's the danger, and that's 10, 11, and 12, and Rinpoche is still talking on that we get lost. And so any of you who've been doing this for a while, you're familiar with, well, this kind of getting lost, I suppose. Because we hear these words, inherent existence. We hear it over and over again. But what does that really mean? How often do we sit down and try to find our own sense of an inherent I? I mean, it's there the whole time. The mind at all times holds on to an inherent existence. But how often are we really have the presence of mind? And even if not in that moment, but later on, we sit down and we go through the day, go through a situation when it was really strongly there. The mind doesn't always have that strong sense of inherent existence. Sometimes it's not there, but at times it's very strong. Me, I, they heard me, they heard my feeling. And to go back and check, how did this mind, how did it appear inherently? What is the object I'm trying to negate here? The object of negation, that's so important. I don't want to negate the conventional I, the merely labeled I. No, that doesn't need to be negated. That extra portion that my mind has added to it, that extra characteristic that my mind projects or that my mind wrongly perceives, well, that's what I'm interested in. That I need to recognize and then check whether that can exist or not. But first, what am I trying to check here? Sometimes when we just study this and we get lost in these words like inherent existence, like some kind of monster over there. It doesn't mean anything any longer. It's just words that maybe scare us because it's like, oh, no inherent existence, etc. But he's warning that here in particular, those who just get caught up in study, in a way getting caught up as seeing as just as something academic and not applying this to their own life. So this danger is there. Okay, I think that should be enough for today. I believe I've I did get some feedback that I should talk more about the text itself. And so it does make sense, because that's what you're trying to understand. And Rinpoche has only this much time to go into it. And of course, he's already given great explanation. Rinpoche being so skillful in addressing those who are older students and presenting them with aspects that are not easily understood. And then also going through some things that are easily understood by those who are new to all this. But hopefully with going through the text in this way again, things became a little clearer now. And now we got time for questions. Okay, great. 3 questions. Who's first?
Thank you so much, Geshe-la. Chutsola, could you please unmute?
Oh, yes, Venerable Chutso.
Venerable.
Yes. You can hear me?
I can.
So my question is about what you were talking about. I mean, I'm not sure I understood very well, but when you were talking about the way to meditate, like to first go through the non-findability, and then you talk about to stop analyzing, and then to, yeah, at that point it was not clear anymore. Not sure. So if you can explain again, please. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. So what I meant was, we use the reasoning, for instance, 5 reasonings were presented last time, but one of the main reasoning is, for instance, does the I, so like I said just now, first of all, become aware of an exaggerated sense of an I to my own mind. And now in that way, becoming aware of the object as negated, something independently, solidly there. So when I become aware of that, now I investigate, where does that I exist? Okay, now actually we can just take our usual sense of an I, because usually even if it's not that strong, I mean, most of the time the sense of our I really is that exaggerated. So it's automatic for us. So taking our sense of an I, even in general, where is that I? The way it usually appears to us. So where is that I? We start analyzing, and Rinpoche explained this in his previous lessons. It can only be analyzed in relation to mind and body, because no one believes the I is over there and mind and body are over here. And then you analyze, there are only 2 options. It's one with the body, or it's separate from the body. And so in the end, you go on and you look for it, and you don't find it. Now, what is important now to do is, if you just then stop that meditation and you start doing something else, there's something lacking. So what you should do is, this is the part where you focus on emptiness. You allow for the emptiness to arise, the non-findability to arise to the mind. You come to the conclusion, can't be found, right? But if you just leave it at that and you don't deal with anything further, you may actually fall into the extreme of nihilism at a later point. So leaving aside that analysis of like not finding, continuing to search for it, you come to the conclusion, can't find it. So after the analytical meditation, you spend a few moments on just that non-findability. This is how usually analytical meditation is done. You analyze for a while, and then you just use single-pointed concentration of just focusing on the conclusion just for some time to allow for it to sink deeper. And then you leave that analytical meditation, and now focus on how the self does exist, and focus on dependent arising. Right? So to bring those 2 together, so you haven't found it, but of course it exists. So it exists. And now your analytical meditation, the previous analytical meditation is left aside, a new analytical meditation starts, which means, well, it exists in dependence on causes and conditions. What were the causes and conditions of my I now? What are the parts of this I? And of course, on the deepest level, well, why is it an I? Because it's merely labeled. Okay, it goes through the 3 types of dependent arising, with the deepest being the I is merely labeled. And this merely labeled I has arisen in dependence on causes and conditions. It is dependent on parts. And then bring back, but it doesn't exist inherently. All right. And again, you need to alternate the same those two to a certain degree. You can't do it without alternating, but not that in any sense there's a contradiction. So they assist each other. They complete each other. The idea of emptiness completes the idea of dependent arising, and the idea of dependent arising completes the idea of emptiness. That should be the meditation. Okay. All right. Is that clear? Yeah. It needs a little bit more. I mean, please listen to teachings if you can by Geshe Kelsang. There's a website available. He's an amazing teacher, and there are a lot of teachings that have been translated into English. And yeah, he gave a teaching on Madhyamika that will give you definitely a better understanding. Yeah. Okay, great. Then next question. Yes. Oh yes. Hi B.
Hi. Before I go into the question, can somebody please give us the link of the Geshe Kelsang that you mentioned, please? I'm not familiar with that teacher.
Maybe if someone could put it in the chat, Kumbela, just write in Geshe Tupten, right? The website. I think it's really just Geshe Tupten Kelsang, one word. It depends. I don't really know how it's spelled, but if you've searched for it, you'll definitely find it. It's spelled sometimes with the Tupten, like B or P. If you change it around a little bit, Kelsang, P-E-L-S. But maybe you could, in the meantime, we could post it in the chat.
Kelsang, okay.
Yes.
So I have a follow-up questions to the questions before, and then I have a questions on my own. Please. So regarding about the two meditation of the not finding, and then we go to the depending arising on how the I does exist conventionally. I previously understood that what constitute meditation on emptiness, that as a direct antidote to our ignorance, is that of our mind resting on the not finding. Mm-hmm. That is the actual meditation on emptiness. So,
yes. Okay.
So the next moment when we do the next part on the dependent arising of the conventional I, does that still constitute as the antidote to ignorance? And how soon after do I do that meditation after the not finding?
Okay. Well, actually, the antidote to afflictive emotions is the mind that realizes the unfindability, but directly, has a direct experience. Now, initially, well, we don't have a direct experience of emptiness yet. We start off with like a merely conventional, rough kind of sense what it refers to, and then we come to conceptual understanding, actual realization of emptiness, and then that has to be transformed into an experience. So there are different steps. Now, talking about the first step, how do we actually get to an understanding of emptiness, just a conceptual comprehension of emptiness? Once you have that, and that is the mind that conceptually realizes phenomena cannot be found in that way, that will not eliminate afflictive emotions yet, because it's not a direct experience yet. But besides that, once you get that, initially that non-findability is not complete unless a moment later you combine it with the understanding how phenomena exist. It needs to be made complete. If through this back and forth, you see no contradiction, at some point, if you just focus on the non-findability, you're okay. You're okay. When you arise from that, naturally, things will arise like, well, it will be like a magical illusion. Even without reflecting consciously on dependent arising again, well, you will be aware, okay, things still appear that way. I mean, that becomes very strong once you realize emptiness directly, that sense it's just like a magical illusion. But even before that, even if you've done that bringing together of emptiness and dependent arising, the way just described, if you've done this often enough, then you just meditate on emptiness, the non-findability, And you know automatically, okay, so you've risen from that and things appear again, but you know, yeah, they appear that way as if in and of themselves existing, the way things appear to us usually, but they don't exist that way. You kind of know in the back of your mind. But to get to that, it's important to bring these two together. And I'm basing this on Geshe Thupten very comprehensive teachings on emptiness, but also his Holiness has spoken about it. Oftentimes just with a half a sentence or a sentence and so forth, just stressing that. But of course, the actual meditation on emptiness is the part, the non-findability. Of course, you're focusing on emptiness. When you rise from that and you do the interdependence, the meditation on the interdependence of phenomena, that's not strictly speaking called a meditation on emptiness, because the object is not emptiness. But to get the complete understanding of what emptiness is without falling into an extreme of nihilism, those two need to be complete. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, that's actually the first time I heard of it that way. Thank you for the clarification. Just
Sure.
one small point of clarification. On the second part, when we meditate on dependent arising,
Yes.
basically we are running through the 3 levels of dependent arising.
Yes.
Okay.
And the third is the most important. The third, that phenomena are just labeled to remind ourselves of that itself. Why does it appear? Merely labeled. That's important. But the other two as well.
Okay.
Dependence on causes and conditions. Yeah.
And the questions I have, I think it was a bit unclarity on language. It was something about if I is the mind, then I can see itself. So if I is my as in M-I-N-E or M-I-N-D?
Mind. D-D. M-I-N-D. So this person, I think it was he was called Changkya. He had this question about saying that the I, to him it seems the I is the mind stream. And then he said, well, everything with regard to me is somehow the I. But that was his first statement. And so I think Rinpoche responded to that. And I wasn't immediately sure why Rinpoche said that. There's another way to look at it. And I think I brought it across in that way. I said, well, if lightness and darkness, they're dependent on each other. And so if something is both, then lightness is also darkness. And I kind of put it in the way that wasn't clear enough, but listening to it again, and then also remembering what Changkya Ji has said, well, basically the reasoning as far as I've understood it, if the I is the mind, if, in other words, I and mind are the same. So if there's an inherent I, so based on the assumption that there's not just a labeled I, but an inherent I, and that is the mind, if that is the mind stream or the mind, well, then when we say I perceive my own mind, that would mean the mind perceives itself. It perceives itself, right? And the argument that some people give, they would actually say that the mind perceives itself, but it's actually not the mind, it's another mind. We should be aware that when we say we have a mind, we're not saying we just have one mind, we have different minds, right? So it's not that every mind, like my eye consciousness perceiving the shapes and colors. It perceives shapes and colors. It doesn't perceive itself. I can be aware with a mental consciousness that there's an eye consciousness perceiving shape and color, but that's not the same mind, right? So it's different minds arising, and we can have self-awareness, etc. But it's oftentimes an awareness, like the word for mindfulness in Tibetan is remembrance. So you become aware of anger that was there just a moment earlier, and that you become aware of. So it's a slightly different mind, okay? So it's different. We have many different minds, and they can observe each other, but not every mind can observe itself. There's this debate, can a mind observe itself? Some would say yes, some would say no, but not every mind can perceive itself. We can totally agree on that, such as sense consciousness is not perceiving themselves. But if this idea, the I is the mind, so then the I can perceive things. When we talk about the I can perceive the mind, then if I and mind are the same, then every mind should be able to perceive itself because it's the I, and the I can perceive the mind. And if that is true, If that is true, then the absurdity would follow. Then if I perceives the self, then, well, light would illuminate itself, darkness would obstruct itself, and that wouldn't make sense. Yeah, but this is a reasoning that's part of the study of Madhyamika, of Chandrakirti's text, and it's a little bit, it takes a little bit more analysis. It's actually taken out of a different context. So don't worry about it too much. This example with the lightness and the darkness, it requires a little bit more explanation. Rinpoche uses it a little bit in a different context, but just to stress this again, this idea of a solid I, because if it's the merely labeled I, we wouldn't say that is the mind stream, right? Because the merely labeled I is merely labeled on the basis of the mind stream. But if the I were the mind stream, there's one I, then there's one mind, right? There's one I. I'm not like having a multiple personality in the sense there's an I here and an I there. It feels like a singular entity. And if that singular entity is the mind, then, well, there's just one mind, there's one I, and it would have to perceive itself. And that way, Rinpoche argued. Okay. But does that make a little bit more sense, or did I confuse you more?
I have more follow-up, but I'm going to let other people ask their questions. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, you're welcome. And B, sometimes it's great, just go through it again. Maybe at some point you find the answer yourself. You can always ask again, but stay with it for some time because you have a background I can hear from your question. So you may be able to get there yourself, actually.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, please. Poon King. Hi, Poon King.
King, please unmute.
Hello, Geshe. Yeah, I've got two questions. The first one is after being aware of appearance of dependent arising, should one focus on being very careful on cause and effect? For instance, when one meets with something very attractive, then one reminds oneself, oh, no need to grasp because just dependent arising. Yeah. Then when one meets with something really do not like, aversion, should one, keep reminding oneself it's like, or no point to reject is dependent arising. Is that the way that, I mean, applying it to daily practice?
I think that's a very important question. And I would say absolutely. And I give you an example of that. With causes and conditions, we may not have a sense that just reflecting on causes and conditions can actually reduce certain afflictive emotions. And that's what you're talking about. You're not saying, oh, I'm in the middle of my job and now I sit down and meditate on an emptiness after a certain situation. Of course, we can't do that. So we would like to apply these ideas into our daily life that are less complicated. So for instance, if you have strong aversion, okay, to give you the example, when you're here, and I've given this example many times, but I find this quite potent. You hear of a person doing something unspeakable, killing other people, torturing them, and so forth. We hear that, right? And how does our mind react? Oh, that's an evil person, inherently evil, can't be anything else, just evil. And when when in our mind there are this total evil person, they have no positive qualities, and of course anger arises, resentment arises, and we find ourselves having all this resentment. And then someone says, well, yes, that's what this person did, and explains us how they got there. They were abused when they were a child. They were exposed to violence their whole life. No one looked after them. They were totally left on their own. They had an alcoholic father, an alcoholic mother, and so forth. So all the causes and conditions come together. And I come to a point where I ask myself, if I were in that situation, do I know for certain I wouldn't act differently? Fortunately, I wasn't raised in that environment, and you feel this aversion, it softens your heart. You can actually feel yourself having compassion for that person, for what they've gone through, and even compassion for these horrible actions they've accumulated, the results of which, of course, they will have to experience at some point. So you can reverse by understanding it's like no one arises from him or herself as this person. the environment, many causes and conditions, of course, also the negative actions, which they unknowingly accumulated. They didn't know, being born in such an environment. I mean, if they had known that these actions that caused them to be born in that environment had that result, they wouldn't have done it. But not understanding cause and effect, etc. So really seeing the whole picture, including all the causes and conditions, can really soften your heart. And if you're attached to this Superman guy, again, causes and conditions that, you know, it's like not in and of itself, this is the Superman guy. It's your perception of things influenced by your parents. And, you know, this is one perception, part of the culture, etc. If you see it that way, it's these afflictive emotions that are so one-sided, they start dissipating. So I think great way to look at it. I think it's very
Another thing,
effective.
you know, sometimes when I see really awful things like COVID-19 and all that, so many, and I sometimes feel that, oh, it's my projection, it's my bad projection, and I got to work on improving my projection in that sense, you know, by channeling it into doing the right thing or whatever, rather than it's very good of you to explain that, you know, in those circumstances you should develop compassion and all that. It's great, you know. At times when it's very short, I can't think very well, and then I would say, oh wow, you know, blame on my own projection, you know.
That's also good to also remember, okay, let's because we just sometimes don't have the time. We see something, we react. But then if we don't have the time to go through it, we may do this in the calm of our room, you know. I mean, not even sitting on the meditation cushion. Even when you're driving back, you got some time. At that time, you can go through it. But in the meantime, things don't exist the way they appear. They don't exist that way. My projection, that just helps to bring it down. Definitely effective, yeah.
My second question is that it often says that meditation on subtle impermanence is said to be a doorway to understand emptiness.
Yes, I would agree.
You explain that? I don't understand.
Okay. If we think of you yourself so solid, it seems so solid, but from moment to moment, you're not the same. From moment to moment, you're different. Your mind changes, your body changes. We have that weird sense, because there's the sense of an inherent I, the mind automatically has a sense there's something always the same, but that is never always the same. So if it's changing, constantly changing, if a relationship is constantly changing, the other person is constantly changing, then you feel your attachment, what are you attaching to? It's attaching to quicksand. You know, this castle on quicksand, it's there a moment and it's gone again. So it's a door to emptiness in the sense that our mind, because of our sense of inherent existence, it then creates wrong views of solidity, of concreteness. But nothing is concrete and solid because it's changing all the time. So in that way, if you think more of everything constant changing, think of a molecular, atomic level, everything just racing around, always changing, never the same. That in that sense, if you really gain a deep understanding of that, you're moving definitely towards undoing the sense of solidity. And that, of course, moves you close towards understanding emptiness.
Oh, but then maybe I'm a little confused, is that when I'm thinking of the impermanence of the body, for instance, it's like a conventional truth. And then, you know, how do I then convert into
ultimate truth?
Thinking that,
Right. Okay. It's the same as with dependent arising.
Sorry.
So dependent arising is also conventional truth. So you convert that again, same. How do you convert that to the ultimate truth? Well, in the sense that understanding that as concrete as the I seems, as inherent, as there's something there self-contained, an I there that is self-contained, that remains the same. That sense of an I that we have, that is undone if things are changing all the time. So the sense that is an I you can point at Okay, this non-findability, of course, that's the meditation on emptiness, but you can undo this previously. So when you meditate on emptiness, on impermanence and dependent arising, you're not meditating on emptiness, no, but your mind becomes more flexible as in preparation for when you search for the solid I, because your sense of solidity has already been weakened. And therefore your mind is more flexible now to accept there's nothing to be found without being scared, for instance.
Okay, because of the changing.
Because of the changing, exactly. Nothing solid.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Sure. All right. I know we're a little bit past time, but you can just stay with me or log out, of course, up to you. So we have 2 more questions.
Thank you, Geshe. Marco is next. Marco, can you please unmute?
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, Geshe. I have just one clarification before I ask the question.
Okay.
You were mentioning in Rinpoche as well that dependent origination helps us understand emptiness. And I've been hearing a couple of times from His Holiness Dalai Lama that it is actually a synonym, that dependent origination is emptiness. This is also, I think, what he writes. So if you can clarify that, and that, as I understand, then the emptiness is there is some reciprocal how to say relationship, right? Isn't it, between conventional appearance and emptiness? The emptiness can only exist in relation to the conventional.
Yes.
It cannot exist in any other way, and because of the finding of the final analysis that everything is dependent and on something and conditioned and made of parts and labeled, therefore everything is therefore empty, and that's the only underlying nature of all existent, if that exists.
Okay, the only underlying, well, dependent arising is also the underlying. But if you're saying they're, okay, well, first of all, the clarification, when His Holiness says they're synonymous or equivalent, that's not literally true, that emptiness is dependent arising and dependent arising. It rather means dependent arising as an adjective and empty of inherent existence, they're equivalent. Whatever lacks inherent existence is necessarily dependently arisen. Whatever is dependently arisen lacks inherent existence, right? That's what it means, equivalent. It doesn't mean they have the same meaning. I mean, what does emptiness mean? Can't say it's dependently arisen. That's not the meaning of emptiness. They have a different meaning. However, here as an adjective, as a quality, lack of inherent existence and dependently arisen. We're talking about emptiness itself, right? Emptiness of the vase. Now, that is not the dependent arising of the vase. It's just seen in that abstract way. So the emptiness of the vase, what does it refer to? The lack of inherent existence of the vase. So we don't say that the dependent arising of the vase is the emptiness of the vase, which would, if they were equivalent, that's what would follow. No, we're saying that those two as characteristics, they're equivalent, yes. They're understood at different times in different ways, but you can't have one without the other. And in fact, understanding one assists the understanding of the other. So their realization is mutually dependent, as we've heard today. Does that clarify that part? Yeah. And what you said, I would totally agree. I would totally agree. Even emptiness itself, when we say empty of something, well, what is empty of something? Okay, so you need a basis. You need a basis. So what is this basis? The appearances to us, the sense appearances, all the different objects that we call conventional truth. But you can take even emptiness itself. Emptiness, as you correctly say, emptiness is also merely labeled on the basis of emptiness itself and so forth. So therefore, emptiness itself is also merely labeled. It lacks inherent existence. So you have the emptiness of emptiness and the emptiness of the emptiness of emptiness and so forth, right? therefore, yeah, I would totally agree with what you said. All phenomena, their underlying nature is that they lack inherent existence, and it's instead of being non-existent, they exist independence and other things.
So just one question about the seventh bhumi that you explained, and the difference, as I understood, if I understood correctly, about the understanding and the realization of an arahat comparing
Yes.
to the realization of a bodhisattva on the seventh level.
Yes.
Are you familiar with Acharya Mahabhova?
No.
He's
Acharya Mahabhova? No.
I think he passed away. Anyway, so he achieved the level of arahat.
Okay.
And
yes.
he wrote. I mean, it's quite amazing. His description of his experiences when he saw through it, and he said, such a momentous event creates an enormous impact. The entire universe appears to tremble and quake. That's what it feels when Dhamma and the kleshas are finally separated for good, and the world of conventional reality and the world of absolute freedom ultimately split apart. The nature of pure Dhamma then appears in all of its supreme magnificence, fully revealed within the heart that experiences it. Being closely associated with the chitta, body and mind react to this amazing and unique experience. The chitta's true nature always existed. Sounds like a mother, right? But it had never displayed itself in this manner to the body and the conscious mind. Being wholly unprecedented, the impact of the occurrence is enormous. The aggregates of the body and mind are all conventional realities, the instruments the heart uses for its own purposes. When the chitta collapses, the pure nature that emerges then remains completely unaffected. But the aggregates of body and mind, the khandhas, being strictly governed by the laws of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, are intensely affected. Reflecting their inherently unstable nature, the reactions occur in the skandhas and then simply cease. The pure nature of the chitta never arises, never ceases. Herein lies the difference between the two. So, to me, it sounds like not only that he understood the darkness, right, the first problem, but he also understood the conditioned nature of the appearance of the eye. So I don't know whether I don't know where it comes from. Where does it come from? This difference between or let's say the why they're saying that the arahats don't see the conditioned eye.
No. Wait, maybe there's a misunderstanding. The arahat does. The arahat, you see, there's some philosophical schools that in Tibetan Buddhism you learn about them. Many of them are no longer active, if you like. They have no followers any longer, but their views are a good stepping stone to understanding the Prasangika view. That's why we study them. But some of them wrongly believe that an arhat doesn't have to realize the subtlest selflessness. In other words, the lack of inherent existence of the I. It's enough just to realize there's no independent kind of I, or they're like independent in the sense like a pea in a jar, like a solid kind of thing that can be found upon tearing apart mind and body. I mean, there's a deeper level than that. But some believe that's the deepest level you need to understand. The deepest emptiness, you only have to realize to become a Buddha. And this is what Chandrakirti is saying is not the case. There is no difference in terms of the wisdom of an arhat and the wisdom of a bodhisattva, just from the point of view of having to directly experience emptiness. So Rinpoche talked about like a cloth. I called it a cleaning device, right? Like Rinpoche said, like anything, like a cloth, anything you use to clean the mind. What is that? That's the mind realizing emptiness. And what is the difference between an arhat and a bodhisattva, or a Hinayana practitioner and a Mahayana practitioner? It is the motivational force. whether you want to be self-liberated or you become a Buddha. You use the wisdom. The wisdom takes on a different strength, takes on a different ability. But other than that, the difference between the wisdom, there's no difference. Both realize emptiness directly. The only thing is that bodhisattvas, because their wisdom has to grow stronger in order to eliminate not only the obstructions to liberation, but also the obstructions in the mind to enlightenment, it has to, the mind realizing selflessness, although the object remains the same, it gains more strength such that not only the afflictive emotions are eliminated, but also the imprints that were left by those. And moreover, it becomes more skilled in certain aspects, and that is part of this strength that needs to be developed, that it is able to engage in the absorption on emptiness, as in, like, you enter this absorption and you come out right away. Ordinarily, you go in and you remain for some time, and then slowly you come out again. This ability going in and coming out again, it requires a certain skill. And that's what a bodhisattva on the 7th level has. And that's only on the 7th level, his wisdom or her wisdom surpasses that of it, right? That's what this says. But it means both realize the same thing.
Right.
And so it makes sense what you just read, this perception. And of course, those were the words by this person. And I don't know what was the realization behind, but it sounds like it, right? Yeah. Okay. Does that, yeah? Okay, great.
He also, I mean, at the end, he even says that, I think something like that he compares himself still as a mouse comparing to a Buddha. So
okay.
Quite,
yes.
Although
there's
I mean,
still a difference.
Meditations and practice was just beyond.
Yes.
Beyond amazing.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And then there's Elisheva Ayalon. Yes, please.
You can call me Ellie. It's easy.
Ellie. Hi, Ellie. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So my question is, after eliminate the I/mind, does labeling stop completely, or it changes?
After eliminating the I or the mind, you mean after eliminating self-grasping, right?
Yes.
Eliminating self-grasping. Does labeling stop? No. Self-grasping, it's actually, we differentiate, we distinguish between a conceptual mind and a direct experiencing mind. Now, most of our minds are conceptual minds, and labeling is not really so much. We usually think of labeling like the conscious thought, oh, I call this a car, I call this a cupboard. That is a type of labeling, but there's an even subtler type of labeling that happens all the time. It's just having a thought. This is this is that. So a conceptual mind is it's another way of calling a conceptual mind. Another way is a thought, thinking. It is this, it is that. So right now, as ordinary beings, all our mental consciousnesses, with the exception of maybe a few dreams that are direct perceivers, all our consciousnesses during the waking states are conceptual minds, and they're all labeling all the time. So labeling is good. There's nothing wrong with labeling, making sense of the world. This is good, this is bad, he said this, she said that, right? All the time, all our labels are renewed from moment to moment. Okay, so when does labeling stop? Well, when there's no longer conceptual consciousness, when there's no longer thought. And that is when you become a Buddha. Only a Buddha doesn't have thought. Any other living being, whether liberated or not, they still have thoughts, and thoughts label. That's the process of thoughts. Like, it is this, it is that. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with labeling. It's right, just making sense of the world. The Buddha just has direct experience. So the only person who doesn't label is a Buddha. But again, like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a type of mind we happen to have, and we can still have, even though there's no longer any ignorance. But once the imprints are gone, then our mind doesn't need to label, doesn't need to have a thought. It directly experiences. That which keeps the mind from just directly experiencing are the imprints. And when they're gone, this conceptual mind, which is quite limited, no longer arises, because it's a limited mind nonetheless. Does that answer that question? Okay, great. All right. I guess we're done with that. We're
Thank you, Geshe.
Sure, of course. So all that's left, I apologize that I went over time a little bit, but yeah, well, for those who have time, there still were some questions. So let's conclude this now by, of course, dedicating whatever virtue, whatever positive potential we've accumulated here together as a group, learning about Changkya Rölpai Dorjé's wonderful text. May that become a cause, first of all, for our great spiritual masters like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Karmapa, and all the other great lamas in all the different traditions of the Sanskrit Pali tradition. May they all have a very long life. And likewise, may whatever virtue we've accumulated also benefit all the people around us right here and right now, and become one of the causes, or a cause, for us to attain at some point in the future the enlightened state of a Buddha for the welfare of all sentient beings. All right, thank you very much. And then I probably see you again next Saturday.
Thank you so much, Geshe. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Okay.
It was a
Be
great
well.
session.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody. See you next week, Saturday, 4 p.m. again. Thank you so much. Have a lovely Sunday. Bye-bye.